bank and financial companies have all of this information. So we don't have a population register in name, but we have various data sources that can be used. Proprietary data, you're all familiar with this, I'm sure. If you've got a GIS package, it likely came with a bunch of proprietary data. And again, you need to look at the sources of that information. And the new kid on the block is what is generically called big data. We generate this constantly. Twitter, Google search information, Facebook information, all of this information that's coming to us, coming and generated every day in gigabytes and terabytes worth of data. Its analytical capability is being learned. And that's one of the things that distinguishes it from all of these other sources. Standard census and registration systems have been around for a long time. We understand their nuances, their limitations and qualifications. Use and analysis of a lot of big data sources, it's new. And we don't really understand all of the impacts and what you can and can't do with it. So what I'm going to do now is just kind of go through a number of federal data sources and talk a little bit about each of them and give you that overview to hopefully identify some data that you weren't familiar with before. I'll start with the Census Bureau. And again, excuse me, need a little drink of water. Most of you are going to be familiar with census, but some of you, maybe more than I realize, may not be aware of the whole range of data that comes out of the Census Bureau. The Census Bureau is our primary statistical agency in our country. And at the bottom here, you can see a list of various data items, population data. Sure, we're familiar with the decennial census and the American Community Survey. But regular estimates every year for small areas, cities, towns, villages in New York, characteristics of that population by age, sex, race, and Hispanic origin. That's data that's refreshed every year and is used in conjunction with the American Community Survey. One of the unique aspects of that data is its geography. And you can get the geographic base down to the block level in much of the census data. ACS and other survey data isn't quite so precise in geography, but still available. And then there's a whole range of economic characteristics. The economic census that is taken every 5 years. The 2017 census is in process as we speak. County business patterns. How many businesses, of what type, of what size, down to the county and zip code level. Characteristics of business owners, minority business owners, women-owned businesses. All of this information comes out of the Census Bureau. The geography isn't quite as precise. Counties, for sure, is a primary unit. Some large places, and in the case of the county business patterns, it's the zip business patterns at the zip code level. Business data, construction, building permits. If you're coming to the webinar from a local government, your local government provides the Census Bureau with information on construction and building permits. Employment information comes out of the economic census, but the census also tracks non-employers, people like me, single-person consultants, employees. Births and deaths. You know, we tend to get a snapshot of characteristics with much of our data, but births and deaths in the business environment give you information on how many new businesses were created, how many disappeared. And this at the county level can be an important indicator of economic health. Local employment dynamics, I'm going to talk a lot more detail about that. It's a unique data source that links a number of different data sets. And again, in geography, county, place, zip code is the standard level of geography. Governments, how large is our government? How many people are employed? What are the finance? How much do they get in taxes? Criminal justice. Census Bureau provides a lot of this information, and it's generally at the local government level because those are the required units of geography. And all of the census data that is available, attribute data, has to be linked to geography. And you know that that's one of your primary concerns. And here, you know, the Census Bureau allows you to download all of the geographic boundary files, shape files, for American Fact Finder, through American Fact Finder and directly through their FTP site. So there's a tremendous amount of data available from the Census Bureau, not just demographics. And I don't know if you've experienced it since you're GIS professionals, you probably don't use it. For somebody like me that is kind of a novice and infrequent GIS thematic mapper, I'll sometimes use the Census Bureau, the Fact Finder mapping system, just to get a quick look. And that's what this is, a quick thematic map of median family income from the American Community Survey. This is by county subdivision. So, you know, if you just want a quick visual to throw into presentation, you can do that pretty quickly and easily on American Fact Finder. For somebody like me, I have to struggle with making sure I've got the right boundary files and links and joins with data. So sometimes it's just a lot easier to use Fact Finder. Gives you some capabilities, but not a lot. In your GIS, you're much more capable. Bureau of Labor Statistics is another one of our primary federal statistical agencies. Census and BLS make up primary basis for economic and demographic data. And BLS, labor statistics, you think of employment and unemployment and labor force data. Pay attention to local media, you don't often realize that BLS, in conjunction with state labor departments, estimate unemployment for each individual county and individual places of 25,000 or more. So just in the employment and labor force arena, there's a lot more data than what we typically hear about in the media. But again, look along the bottom here and pay attention to all the various things that BLS does. It's not just labor and employment. How much do we pay for things? What's the consumer price index and producer price index? Consumer expenditures, national survey on how we all spend our money. How much do you spend on housing and shelter and fuel and food and going out to eat? All of that information is collected in a national consumer expenditure survey. Want to know about imports and exports and prices? BLS is a source. The downside is you get a lot of detail, but geography isn't so detailed. Some of these are national surveys, so you get the nation, sometimes states and metro areas, but oftentimes no more detail than that. Employment and unemployment, somewhat straightforward, but it comes from different sources, and you have to pay attention to that. Non-farm payroll, that comes from actual business reporting, not survey data on unemployment. The quarterly census of employment and wages is just that. It's a census of individual businesses that have to report, and you can get that information at sometimes county level, but it varies. Counties, states, metros for sure, counties and place data for larger areas. Pay and benefits, national comparisons of how much people work, how much people get paid for different types of jobs, but unfortunately mostly national in scope. Want to know how we spend our time? The BLS American Time Use Survey will do that. It gives you information on essentially a diary. Think about your day and how you spend your day, and if you had to record every 15 minutes how you spend your time, that is the American Time Use Survey. It's mostly national data though, so it gets you some interesting detailed demographics and other detail, but geographically it's pretty limited. Mapping, again, if you want to produce a quick visual thematic map, you can do that directly on BLS site for a few indicators. You can see that you can do it for states and counties. Simple unemployment rate, historical data. You can put together a visual of historical change in unemployment, but it's pretty crude. It doesn't give you a lot of capability to manipulate it. What you want to do is download the data. If you need to do things that are more sophisticated, you get into the BLS download facility, and you can then have the flexibility of mapping however you want to use the characteristics that are available. This longitudinal employer household dynamics data is something that I'm going to speculate that most of you are not familiar with. LEHD for short is a data set that has been developed over, I'd say, at least the past decade. And what makes it unique is that it's a link between various detailed record systems. It's a cooperative effort between states and the Census Bureau and other federal agencies. States provide very detailed and confidential data on employment and employers. So from the tax department, you have information on wages, how much people are paid. And from the Labor Department, you have business information. Who are the businesses that employ these folks? And from links to Social Security, you can put together some demographics on who these people are, their age and gender and other demographic characteristics. And what LEHD does is link all of these data sources through a very complicated and sophisticated matching routine and coding identification routine to strip all identifiers. So what you've got are unique data sources that don't exist in any one of these sources, but when combined, provide a very rich source of information. Couple of things to pay attention, couple of the applications here are this QWI Explorer and On the Map. I'm going to talk briefly about both of them. QWI stands for Quarterly Workforce Indicators. And so every quarter you can get information on the workforce for various geographic areas. The geography, you can see here, geography, it defaults to none, but that is a state level. That's not really all you can get. This drop-down will give you information for counties, metropolitan areas, and workforce investment areas. And you can see the detail of information that you get. This default goes to ages, so you get age information for the workforce by quarter. And if you look at these drop-downs for the x-axis and group, you can change those and get various indicators in this graphic example. Now, as GIS professionals, you don't want to work with this graphic. I'm going to show you in a minute. All of this data can be downloaded. So once you download this attribute information, then you have the power of your GIS along with all of these characteristics of the attributes. So the quarterly workforce indicators are an important data set to manage or monitor economic changes. On the map is another unique capability. And it's unique because of the geography and what this thing can tell you. On the map allows you to look at the link between the residence of the employee and the location of their job, the employer. And what you can then do from that, this is just an example of Albany County, you can look at the people, the 86,000 people who live and work in Albany, 133,000 people who live outside of Albany County and work in Albany County, and 46,000 people who live in Albany County and work outside. That's just one way that you can look at the data. It's kind of a standard default. You can alter a number of the parameters here and get much more detail. And in fact, county is, kind of useful from a gross metro area analysis standpoint. But remember, location of individual and location of business is specific physical location. So this data can go down to much more detailed geographic areas. Wonderful set of data, and it's updated regularly. You can look at changes in hires and fires, changes in wage information. By virtue of its name, you can imagine it is a dynamic data set that is updated on a very regular basis and is a wonderful data set for analyzing economic and labor force impacts. And again, you're not necessarily, as GIS professionals, going to use the on the map. You want the data. And this is just one portion of the data access page at Census gives you the origin and destination employment statistics, all at the census block geographic level. Now, that's pretty much unheard of in most data sources because of confidentiality and security issues. Since all of that information is stripped off and there is sophisticated modeling going on here to generate the data as estimates, the data can be at a much more granular geographic level, and you can download that information and work with it on your own. Moving on, a new federal agency. Within the Centers for Disease Control, the National Center for Health Statistics is one branch of which provides data. This is where that vital registration system comes into play. Birth and death data that, as a demographer, I would use extensively, comes through the National Center for Health Statistics. But that, again, is not all they do. So vital records, yes, it's births and deaths and other health indicators related to births and deaths, but there are a slew of surveys, National Health and Nutrition, Health Interview Survey, surveys that deal with family and retirement, other types of providers, surveys that deal with providers of health care, ambulatory care, medical care, hospital care, long-term care providers. Again, one of the things that is frustrating from a policy standpoint, and I experienced this while working for New York State, there is so much data that helps inform decisions and analysis that, well, I don't want to get too political, that we tend to not pay attention to. There's a lot of data that can help us help guide us, but we aren't using that as effectively as we should be. A couple of the data access tools within the National Center for Health Statistics, the most important, I shouldn't say most important, one that I'm most familiar with is CDC Wonder. This is an online application that allows you to extract data at various levels of geography. Most of my experience has been at the county level, since state and county data was my primary geographic entity. But this tool will give you access to the vital records data as well as a lot of other health-related information that is collected by CDC and the National Center for Health Statistics. And like many of the other agencies, they give you some rudimentary mapping capability. There's a whole catalog of data visualizations within NCHS. I just picked out one, total birth 3,000 females, 15 to 19. Births among teenagers have been declining for a long, long time. But of course, as analysts, one of the things that we always want to look at are spatial and geographic differences. And you can see pretty starkly here the difference across our country just in states in terms of teen birth rates coming out of NCHS. Again, a huge catalog of data that can be used to inform decision making. Another category of information is education. Like the National Center for Health Statistics, there's a National Center for Education Statistics. And this covers everything from preschool all the way up through secondary education and advanced education. And that data is available in a variety of ways at various geographic levels. Again, you can imagine a lot of data related to education and students is confidential, and so getting into individual information and very small area geographies is sometimes difficult. But early childhood data, larger geographies, but important information. It's a longitudinal study, so it tracks characteristics of children as they're developing and going through school experiences. Elementary and secondary school education, both public and private. This is data that you can get for the individual school. What's the enrollment? How many teachers are there? Faculty-student ratios, administrative information, costs of education. Post-secondary and secondary education covers almost 10,000 institutions, public and private. And again, you can get data for individual institutions in pretty substantial level of detail. Every school has to report to Center for Education Statistics on their enrollment and characteristics. This thing called IPED, I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. That's a data access tool that allows you to get information, get at this information. Assessments. You're probably familiar with the term Nations Report Card. This is a source that compares district to district on educational indicators, how well students are doing, various grade levels. And data systems, common education standards, educational statistics, again, a whole range of information that is available here for education statistics. IPEDS, again, this is the thing that I'm familiar with. IPEDS is powerful in terms of the amount of data that it can get into your hands. It's also got a bit of a learning curve. It's not something I use every day. Whenever you use something every day, it's pretty routine. Whenever you get into it every 6 months or a year, you have to relearn, and it's got a learning curve to it. But once you've established that, you can learn a lot about the various surveys that are available to you, analyze trends. An individual institution, you want an individual institution, you can get very detailed enrollment and other characteristics about it. You can compare institutions. There's a standard set of statistical tables, and NCGIS puts out an educational digest every year of hundreds and hundreds of tables for the nation, for states, and for districts. So all of that information is readily available to you. Once you we'll go through the learning curve and learn how to access it. And IPEDS isn't the only data access tool within NCES. Data Lab allows you to do table creation and some statistical analysis. You can look directly at public and private school districts, and all of these are tailored to focus in, filter in on just certain aspects of the data and sources of the information. Pardon me. Criminal justice data, another data source that is, I guess in my more cynical days might say is greatly misused, but there's an awful lot of data available. This is the Bureau of Justice Statistics main topic page, and you can see the various, the extent of data types that are available. Data on corrections, data on federal courts and corrections, victims, courts, crime by type, aspects of improvement of criminal justice data, law enforcement. Again, tremendous amount of data that can be used for analysis and policy decision making. Excuse me. It's available for all sorts of different purposes, law enforcement, civil rights enforcement, and civil rights we most often think of as racial rights, but that's not it entirely at all. Disability, education, immigration, all of those become part of the civil rights side of the data and analysis. So there are lots of topic areas here. The downside is you don't always get a lot of data. One of the ones that I was interested in looking at was drugs and crime. And whenever I clicked on drugs and crime, well, there were two very old, not so detailed reports. I think they went back to like the early 2000s. They haven't been refreshed. So you're going to have to take some of this and do a little bit more digging and go into the individual data collection. So again, this is topics, but explore the data collections and data analysis tools, because that's where you'll be able to get at more of the detailed information. One of the most used aspects of this data is what comes out of UCR, Uniform Crime Reporting. This is the data that the FBI gathers, and every law enforcement agency in the country reports into the UCR. So that's where our data on crime comes from. You can see you get national data back to the 60s, state data, city and county data. So all of, again, any entity that has a law enforcement office is going to be reporting, and much of that data is available to you. Crimes by type and victims and the individuals committing crimes. So again, tremendous amount of information that is available out of the crime statistics arena. This is just an example. New York City prepares a whole catalog of mapped information about the city. And this is just one example that comes from that crime reporting data. And for the city by precinct, you can, they have produced graphics, maps about various levels of crime. This is just one example. So again, you as a data user, you're going to want to download the information and then be able to associate that to whatever geographic level that you're able or responsible for. Cities, counties, states, whatever. Tremendous amount of data that's available to you here. Another hot topic in our world, immigration data and statistics. Now, there's a lot that goes flying by the world in the media about immigration today. And frankly, as a demographer and paying attention to a lot of it, there's not a whole lot that is based on real data, and that's unfortunate. There's a tremendous amount of data that is available on immigration in our country about the process and about immigrants. This yearbook of immigration statistics, every year the Department of Homeland Security puts out this yearbook and gives you an excruciating level of data about immigrants in our immigration process. Lawful permanent immigrants, refugees and asylees, naturalization process, non-immigrant admissions, immigration enforcement. There's so much data to help inform a policy that it's, well, again, as I mentioned early on, sources and understanding sources. When you do that, you can understand how the data can be most effectively applied. And in this case, it isn't always applied too well. The point is that there's a lot of data for you to access and analyze the immigration process in our country. And I use this data in my class pretty frequently in talking about what that process is and how, as a nation of immigrants, we need to better understand who, how, and why people are wanting to come to this country. And the data's there. So I encourage you to take a look at that. Both the legal and illegal, which I'll talk a bit about in another few minutes. Good old Internal Revenue Service, taxes, the agency that we all love. Well, maybe not so much so. Again, from a data standpoint, it's a wealth of information. Information on who pays, how much they pay. It's about our incomes and about taxpayers, how much individuals versus corporate taxes, business taxes. All of that information is available here and can be analyzed. Sometimes it's not always at the geographic levels that we like, but there's still a tremendous amount of information available coming out of data. One of the things that I'm most experienced and have worked with in the past comes out of the individual tax side of the IRS, and that's using IRS data for migration. You don't typically think of tax data as being a source of migration data, but as a demographer, it's a pretty valuable data set. Think about what you do whenever you file your taxes every year. You fill out a tax form and it's located to your residence, and that residence is associated with you and your dependents, all of the folks that are reporting on your form for income. Census Bureau and the IRS develop a link between the geography and the tax information to develop some flow information. So again, you report your taxes year to year. The Census Bureau and IRS link those tax returns year to year. So you compare what we just filed in our 2017 taxes to tax year 2016, and you look at those addresses. And from those addresses, you can look at people who have not moved, address is the same. You can look at people who have moved, who are in a different location. And the Census Bureau codes this by, and they can develop county to county migration. And that's what you have here in the middle that you can download and access. County to county migration data, state to state migration data. That change in address is the basis for it, and obviously accurate geographic coding of addresses is important. From the IRS, you get the number of tax filers. So husband and wife and 3 kids, you've got the household of 5 individuals. And if those 5 individuals have moved, then you have 5 pseudo-migrants. I say pseudo-migrants because not everybody files tax returns. Not everybody has filed in 2 consecutive years. So there are some qualifications to this data. You don't have to file taxes. College students may be picked up on their parents' return, may not be picked up on their parents' return. Low-income folks who don't have to file. Older folks who don't have to file. So there are qualifications, but it's still a hugely important indicator of migration in our country. And one of the things that I typically do out of this data and would always provide to our management and economic development was a chart like this that basically looked at New York's top origin and destinations. Where do we get migrants from? Well, New Jersey's #1 on the list. A lot of cross-border migration in New York, again, focused primarily on New York City. But Florida, #2. Foreign immigration for New York, #3. Pennsylvania, California, Massachusetts. Top locations for in-migrants. Where do our out-migrants go to? Florida, #1 on the list. A lot of people back and forth to New Jersey, Pennsylvania. And you can look at the list. The thing to point out here is that this data gives us the number of returns, which is a proxy for households, the number of exemptions, which is a proxy for the number of people, and incomes. Look at Florida, for example. 32,000 people migrate in from Florida, 49, almost 50,000 migrate out. Incoming income, $687 million, almost $1 billion. Going out, $2 billion. It again is a gross indicator of economic impacts. And one of the, I'm a stickler on the sources, but here I don't even have the date. Why don't I have the date? This chart doesn't change. This has been going on for decades. The order, whoa, where'd everything go? Okay. I'm not sure if I did something or not. Anyway, so the order of states may change a little bit, but the basic flows don't change. So that's why, even though there are qualifications about the IRS migration data as a source, it's still very valuable. It paints a picture for us. A couple other data sets to talk about in the world of federal data. I'll do this a little bit more quickly. We're kind of moving on here in time. Social Security Administration, lots of information about the older population, but not just older folks getting Social Security. This thing, OASDI, is about disability information, and we too often think of Social Security just about the elderly, and we don't think about OASDI beneficiaries, which are primarily children and disabled. Lots of data in historical information and by state and zip code, state and county. The Department of Agriculture, the Economic Research Service, is another huge source of information on agriculture, animal products, crops, farming practices, the whole range of information about agriculture in our country. Bureau of Transportation Statistics, another catalog of data that covers the whole range of how we as individuals move around, as well as commodities get moved around through our country. Airline travel, data by airport, embarkations and number of flights, trucking information, how do we move produce around our country. All of that freight information comes out of BTS. Kind of if you link some of the agriculture data with commodity information from BTS, soybeans. Soybeans are grown almost throughout our country. This is various regions that BTS monitors data for. Never knew that soybeans were so prolific around the country. Peanuts. Never knew that peanuts grew up in the northwest of the country. I always thought it was a southeastern product. Again, geography, spatial analysis helps us understand data better than we would otherwise. All of the sources I've talked about so far are federal data sources, and they primarily provide us with summary and aggregate information. There's another catalog of data called Microdata, which deals with individuals and individual systems, and that data is available also. It's much more granular in terms of geography, but it's much more detailed in terms of characteristics. IPUMS, I pronounce it IPUMS, some people say IPUMS. IPUMS rolls off my tongue easier. It comes out of the University of Minnesota, and it contains microdata, individual information from the Census and American Community Survey, Current Population Survey, which is our source of monthly employment information. They gather international microdata, health data, environmental data, time use data, a whole variety of sources of information that are granular in terms of the individual or the process that's involved. What that does, what you sacrifice in geography, census, for example, is only available for areas of 100,000 population or more. What you sacrifice in geography, you gain in characteristics, because you have the full range of characteristics about the population and households in the census. And for those geographies, IPUMS has all of the boundary information that you can download. So you can download the data, you can download the geography, and you have very powerful set of information. The kicker here is you have to be an academic or not-for-profit. This is not to be used for commercial processes, providers, but most of you are in local government and academic arenas. You're perfectly able to register and get at this data. Policy Map is a nonprofit data aggregator. They scrape data from all of these federal agencies and a variety of others to provide mapping primarily for policy analysis. In addition to the data aggregator, they are policy analysts and feed that data into decision-making processes. So a lot of data available. Demographics, incomes, housing, lending activity. This is just a subset of it. And they present to you a matrix of information, again, that gives you the geographic levels that the data set is available for, and whether it's for free, subscriber-based, and whether you can just download it or use it on your website. So Policy Map is an important data aggregator of information. Let me get over here. Lastly is the Pew Research Center. Pew is another not-for-profit, and they do a tremendous amount of survey information you can see a whole range of topics. Illegal immigration is one of their real areas of expertise. They generate the most reliable estimates of illegal immigration in our country. So that's a fast rundown on a whole variety of data sets, and I know that I'm pushing into the question and answer period, so I'm going to turn it back over to Roz to see if we have any questions, and I will try my best to give you some answers.
Thank you, Bob. Thank you very much for excellent presentation, excellent details on a ton of data sources. And let's get right into the Q&A section. As I mentioned in the chat box, if you have any questions, send those in via the chat box. I will read out each question to Bob and allow Bob time to respond. So with the first question we have from Angelo Marino, will you be providing a list of the websites you previewed in the webinar?
Well, the webinar is available, recorded and available, but I can certainly make the presentation available, which will give you all of these sites. If you noticed at the top of each of them was the URL for each of the pages that I was in. So yes, I can make that available.
Excellent. I think that answers the other question in terms of recording. As Bob mentioned, this will be this has been recorded, will be provided on the New York State GIS Association professional development page, as well as on our YouTube page, and we will have those made available. Next question, do you have any tips and tricks in obtaining metadata when not easily available?
I can't say that I do. Sometimes, as you're probably well aware, it's a struggle. That's one of the things, again, that I emphasize in terms of source information. How can you evaluate the data and its quality if you can't get at the source information? Some agencies are better than others, and you're probably already aware of that. So I don't have any particular sources. It's playing detective and trying to get at the information. What I do is I have no qualms about getting into the Public Information Office or following the analyst links to try and get detail of information. I've been successful at doing that in a number of different areas for both agency and even some proprietary information. I like to use examples in my class of data that is kind of off the beaten path, and sometimes it requires going back to Public Information Officer to get an analyst link to find out about it. So can't say that I have anything that is tried and true and easy. It's a detective operation.
Thanks, Bob. Next question. Do you use data.gov?
Not a lot. There will be a lot of the data that I've talked about that is accessible on data.gov. My preference is to kind of go back and get as much detail out of the source agency as possible. So I tend to go to the individual agencies rather than the more aggregate data. A lot of agencies, what they put up on data.gov is not as detailed as what's available directly. So if you do that source investigation to find out that there's more detailed data available, then you'll be able to get that from the individual agencies. So yes, I use it, but my preference is to go to the individual agency.
Next question. Can you please re-provide the site for where the town and city crime stats are reported? Example, New York City crime stats.
If we go back, Okay, Uniform Crime Reporting System is where you're going to get that data. County, if you go to this URL for the main data, the county and crime, city and county crime data will be available. You may have to follow some more links in order to get it, but start here.
Thanks, Bob. Next question. Do you have any tips and techniques for cleaning up messy data? Example, data with duplicates, etc.
Oh boy, that becomes so unique to the data set and the source that you're working with. Can I suggest something that's kind of universal or standard? That's a tough one. Yeah, I'll give you an excruciating example. The Census Bureau has just gone through their process of allowing local governments to do address review for the 2020 census. And talk about messy data sets. Whenever you try and look at local data on addressing, it's just horrible. And unfortunately, so often, things like Excel and sorting and matching have their limits, and sometimes it is an excruciating visual process. So depending on the data set, there are some things that I'll do to try and weed through it, but as you probably, by asking the question, you've dealt with a lot of messy data, and you know that they're difficult to standardize processes. You guys are asking tough questions that I don't have good answers for. Cleaning up data is just horrible. And one of the things, I guess I'll go back to the data.gov. One of the good things about data.gov is the data has been viewed before it gets in there. And there's some geographic consistency in terms of coding. Simple consistency in geographic coding. Does everybody use a county FIPS code? Do they have the leading zeros? Simple things like that make comparability and matching of data sources more difficult than they should be, because agencies don't always follow a standard.
Thank you, Bob. Next question. Did you mention EPA's EJ Screen mapping tool?
I did not, and that would have been a good one to include. Hopefully, Razi and the company will get together another webinar devoted to that.
I'm not familiar with that tool, Bob. Do you have more details in terms of what that tool may provide?
I'm not. Hopefully Joshua, who asked the question, can inform us.
Joshua, that's a question for you. I'm not sure if you have any details or just a general info that you can provide. We'd like to share that with the audience. If there's any other questions, please let me know. And we have a few more minutes left for the webinar. Please send those in via the chat box. I'll give you about 30 seconds. Thank you, Joshua, providing a link to the mapper for everyone that was curious, and myself included. Any other questions for Bob? Any other questions for Bob while we have the opportunity to ask Bob a few more questions? If not, we'll wrap things up. Going once, going twice. I want to thank Bob again. I met Bob almost a decade ago when he was with the state. Basically everything demographics that I was not familiar with early on in my role with the planning organization, the Finger Lakes. I was able to learn a ton from Bob and from his team out in Albany. So I was very happy when Bob agreed to provide this webinar. I think a lot of you are very happy as well with your thank yous and great webinars there. Bob, any final words before we sign off?
Well, I don't think so, Razi. It's nice to get back in touch. I saw a few names of colleagues from back when I was in that working world with New York State. So my best to all of you. Thanks for your kind attention, and hope I was able to give you some useful information.
Thank you again, Bob, and thank you for everyone for attending. And again, if you have not renewed your membership with the New York State GIS Association, it's a really easy process. You can go to the New York State GIS Association website, which is nysgis.net, and it's just $10 to renew for professionals, $5 per student. If you know any colleagues or anyone that you can reach out to join, please share that with them as well. For anyone that's not a member, please consider joining. It's only $10 for professionals, $5 for students. Really allows us to grow our membership, provide more services as this. And thank you again for your time and your attendance and everyone's participation. And again, thank you to our presenter, Bob Scardamalia. I hope everyone enjoys the remaining weeks and days of the summer and the month of August. So with that, thank you and have a good day.